Does your room look like this? Not everyone is blessed with tons of natural light or even indoor lighting, but you still need to pick a paint color that's going to work best. I want to go over what you should consider when picking colors for a darker room, perhaps some things to avoid as well, and then finally, I'll give you a couple color choices. Lighting has such a huge impact on the look and feel of your home, as well as your paint color specifically. A beautiful beige in one room might look like a dingy gray-green in another, so you want to make sure that you assess exactly what you're working with. In regards to indoor lighting, natural light is the pinnacle. I have a beautiful, big old window right here, and that's because it's usually going to be the brightest as well as the most cost-effective kind of lighting there is. It's free. Problem is, not everyone is blessed to have a big, giant floor-to-ceiling window to allow light to pour in. When you're working with a darker room, it's usually a good idea to diagnose the problem. Maybe the paint color that's on there right now is simply too dark, and that's what's making everything look really cave-like. Or maybe there's just not enough windows and insufficient indoor lighting to compensate. First thing to do is make adjustments where you can. It's not always practical to knock down a wall, but you can definitely opt for additional artificial lighting, or even see if you can use more brighter, efficient bulbs in your existing lights. But this is the paint people after all. So we're definitely going to talk about how you can use paint to open up a space. So on that note, let's start with a few things to avoid when trying to lighten up a space. The first one may surprise you. Don't just paint everything white. You might have heard people say the lighter the paint, the brighter the room. Definitely the case when we're talking about light reflectance value, which is literally the number that determines how much light reflects off of a certain color. And as you get lighter, that number goes up. But the desired effect is usually less than ideal in rooms that lack sufficient lighting. When you go with a completely desaturated white on your walls, the overall look can appear to be a bit flat and dull looking. Your walls are just going to become completely influenced by the very little light that hits it, which can make areas like the corners look really dull and dingy. Also, in regards to color theory, it's actually darker colors that can create the illusion of a larger space because of how the walls can look like they're receding inwards, creating a more expansive feel. That doesn't mean you should go ahead and paint your whole room jet black, but there are ways you can utilize dark colors to enhance a space that doesn't get a lot of lighting. But we'll get to that in a little bit. In terms of some of the main default colors that you should consider are definitely going to be on the lighter side, because you do want that feeling of airy buoyancy in the space, but that is not accomplished by going as bright as possible. I would try to set a soft limit right around 80 light reflectance value, or LRV, which you can find on any major paint website. And that's kind of your starting point for your main color in a darker room. You don't want to go much brighter than that generally because, like I mentioned before, the overall look will be dull and lifeless in a lot of cases. I also tend to favor colors that are on the warmer end of the spectrum as well. Warmer tones can really elevate spaces and have them feel more easygoing and cozy, and can really coordinate well with warm indoor incandescent lighting, which you might be using. But even if you're going for more cooler white or bluish LED lighting, there's going to be enough warmth in the paint color to help keep any colors feel balanced. One thing to know about colors, especially the more neutral grayish ones, when they are used in darker rooms, you're more likely going to see a little bit of that green color cast in many cases, so just try to avoid more yellow dominant undertones and instead opt for more beige or creamy ones. A solid choice I would start with would be Sherwin-Williams Alabaster, as it's going to feel quite bright and uplifting, but it still has that warm beigey taupe pop to allow it to feel more substantial rather than just plain old white primer. I would also encourage you to check out colors with a bit more saturation and therefore a lower LRV. Colors like Shoji White with a 74 LRV, it really amps up the warm aspect of your wall color. You might be wondering if this color is a little bit too dark or deep for a dimly lit room, but it's still objectively within that lighter spectrum of colors, and it's going to look way more interesting than a polar bear white, for example. Do you have to limit yourself to warmer tones? Not necessarily, no. I just find that overall, they're a little easier to implement, especially when you're also having to manage light coming in from windows, even if it's a very small amount. As awesome as natural light is, it's unpredictable and it can change throughout the day. So in a north-facing room, that cool gray that you really liked in the paint store could turn into a flat-out blue instead. If you're working in an area that has little to no windows that are bringing in light, then you can have a little more freedom with the color temperature because you're going to be a little more in control with the light that's in the room itself. So in that case, less light kind of works in your favor. Before we get to one of my biggest tips about the paint you pick, I want to quickly talk about everything else that's in the room. Although the walls take up a large amount of visual space, there's also a lot of other components in your room that you have to consider. Your floors and your furniture, they're going to play a huge part in the overall feel of the room. If you want to further accentuate that open and airy feeling in a dimly lit room, then it's usually a good idea to also keep your furniture, your fixtures, and your flooring as light as possible. If you have the opportunity to select a new couch that's maybe an off-white instead of a dark cold gray, that'll help lighten the room quite a bit. But if you're on a budget, then maybe consider a slipcover for your couch, or a nice and light area rug, or some beautiful light curtains. Things like this can really change the dynamic of a room because the lighter the items and surfaces are, the more light will then be reflected off of those surfaces. So the more light components, the better. But again, for your walls, don't go too light. I mentioned earlier that you could also use darker colors in those dark rooms. No, I'm not gonna say that going dark is gonna make your room feel lighter. There might be some circumstances where it's just gonna look better if you really go with that dark flow of the room and opt for something a little more bold and daring rather than trying to force a lighter color that just doesn't suit the space. Just so you don't completely turn the room into a cold cave, still try and incorporate those lighter elements like light natural woods and some nice woven fabrics or even some green plant life to inject some life into the space. The last piece of advice that I'll leave you with is one that's sometimes overlooked in these situations. Finding the right color is going to take some time, I know, but you really have to consider what finish you need to use because that's also going to play a pretty big role in how the overall look is going to come together. Matte finishes have become arguably the most popular indoor interior wall finishes these days, but I would actually recommend going with the previous standard known as eggshell. An eggshell finish has a little more of a sheen than matte, and although its selling point is its additional washability, what it also has is that slightly shinier finish, which will not only reflect even more of that light, but it'll make the walls feel a little more dynamic, energetic, and alive. The edges will feel a little more defined, and it's going to make better use of what little light is available to you in your home. If you want a little more detailed information on the different finishes you can opt for, click here for our paint finishes video. And if you want some content on north, south, east, or west facing color options, be sure to let us know which ones you're most interested in so we can make it for you. Okay, bye.